But talking about Mass Effect, specifically, I started playing, I didn't come to Mass Effect until very late in the game. It was just this last year, I think, at some point early last year, I started playing the first one, the first Mass Effect game, and I liked it, but I was just getting so lost because it's one of those games, as I said before, that you really do need a guide. You really do need kind of a map. Because, you didn't say yes to that person, that means they're going to die, 2 games later or whatever, and I got the Legendary Edition, which is great because all of your choices and everything translates and follows over, which is fun because I like games like that. I like playing through a good, solid story. That is what I go to video games for, a good story. I'm not interested in just, fun gameplay or just, I was never a Tetris fan, I want a good story. So I like that aspect of it. And eventually I found, some guides or whatever that wouldn't spoil things, but still let me know the importance of certain decisions and they slow down here, make sure you got a backup save in case you do this wrong or whatever. So, and I played through the first one and loved it. Played through the second one, dearly loved it. And I'm playing through the third one right now and I'm enjoying it thoroughly. I don't see, a lot of people are saying the third one was crappy, but I don't see that yet. But again, I haven't finished it. So maybe there's something I don't know. And I also found out that, of course, BioWare was behind it. Now, I know BioWare is, like every other gaming company, has just gone the way of the woke, and they're nonsense now, especially that Dragon Age debacle and everything. But BioWare back in the day gave us Star Wars The Old Republic, and great writers, great Star Wars EU people were a part of that, Drew Karpyshyn and so forth. And then I found out that there are there are Mass Effects novels and comics that tie into the game story. So I've read all of the comics. I've got that big sort of omnibus of comics, BioWare Mass Effect comics, and I've read all of the comics up through the certain part of Mass Effect 3 that I'm in now. I'll probably go ahead and just review all of those comics once I finish the Andromeda continuity and everything. I've heard Andromeda, people are saying Andromeda was where it really tanks, which I would believe because I think that was like 2017, right in the midst of the woke, hierarchy there and whatnot. So I don't know, but I'll play it anyway and get through this whole story. So I'll wait and review the comics then. A few weeks ago, though, I did review the first novel, Drew Karpyshyn's Mass Effect Revelation. And he actually did a trilogy. And I talked a little bit about Revelation, but I'm just going to review the whole trilogy right now because I finally finished reading. It's Mass Effect Revelation, Mass Effect Ascension, and Mass Effect Retribution. Mass Effect Revelation is the prequel. It's the story of David Anderson, Captain Anderson, as you meet him in the first game, and his dealings with Saren, when he was being looked at as a possible Spectre and so forth. And I said before that when I heard about what this book was about, I didn't really like the concept because I don't like it going into a story which I already know everything that happens. You don't know all the minutiae and the details, but you know the basic gist. Like, okay, I know David Anderson gave a really great synopsis of his time with Aaron. So I was like, well, let me read it. It is Drew Karpyshyn. Let me try it. And it was really great. I was really glad. I enjoyed it. I think what kept me going through it was the character of David Anderson, Lieutenant Anderson he was at this point, because he's such a true blue kind of aspirational hero. He's always trying to do the right thing and so forth. And I really liked following his character. He was a good character to follow, even if I knew some of the big picture, things that happened in the story. It was good. Yeah, I see you got Studio 96. Keith David does the voice. Recognizable, deep man's voice. Keith David, great in the games. Then I read that the second 2 books in the trilogy, these 2 take place this one takes place, I think this one takes place before 2 or just during 2 or something like that. And this one takes place between 2 and 3. So Retribution is the last one, takes place between 2 and 3. Now, these are Karpyshyn's trilogy. There are books that are written after this, with the Andromeda continuity or something. But these are Drew Karpyshyn's trilogy. I'm not crazy about these 2. I like certain things about them. And I like, especially in these 2, especially in Ascension, there's a young girl with autism who's also a biotic. Biotics in Mass Effect world are basically telekinetics. They're able to gather the dark energy and have telekinesis to use in battle and stuff. And she's at this special school for biotics. and she is autistic, and she, doesn't like being touched. She has sensory processing. She's pretty extreme, doesn't really, like socializing very well, doesn't pick up and read people very well. And then I'll say that's one thing about the Mass Effect universe is they really do. I like their portrayals of autism. Whether it's an alien like Liara Tassoni, who's not really autistic, but she's just an alien, and she's, she almost seems a little autistic sometimes, but they portray it in a sweet way. Of course, there's I think his name was David in the DLC for Game 2, when he's the savant whose brother's mistreating him and so forth that you have to save. And you think savant, that's kind of a, there's an autistic person in this story. Oh, they got to be a savant, because every autistic person has superpowers, or whatever. I was like, all right, that's a little, but I do like their portrayals of, as a father of an autistic child, I like their portrayals. I think they get some things right. Of course, it's science fiction, so it's going to be, I don't need a truly realistic on the ground, picture of autism in every which way, but I like the way they did it. So I like that about the two books. But what's missing from these two books is David Anderson. Now, he finally comes in about halfway through Retribution, and that's when it picks up for me and I start liking it a little bit more. But there's some things wrong with these two books, for me anyway. Callie Sanders, you see her in Mass Effect 3. She becomes the head of the Grissom School for Biotics, and she's a through character in all three books. David Anderson kind of has a thing for her and whatnot. She's I was reading through the books, I'm thinking she's kind of Mary Sue-ish. And at first I was like, I don't really want to call her a Mary Sue, because she's not like an Ahsoka Tano. She's not like the hero of the story and the best of the best. But she does have that Mary Sue nature to where she's never wrong. She's always compassionate. She always sees through everything and into the heart of everybody. And she's always, if the big strong men are going to go do something, she's like, no, wait. It's wiser to go do this. And she's never wrong. And she's just an annoying character. She feels contrived. So I didn't like that. And then there are parts in these two stories where I'm not necessarily saying this is Drew Karpyshyn's fault at all. If you read a lot of these franchise books, by franchise books, I mean, novels licensed from big properties, Star Trek novels, anytime a television show becomes popular, you'll have novels of that. These licensed books are written by people who make their living writing those licensed books. They make their living kind of freelance writing, and they need to complete so many books by a certain deadline. The publishers, they're mass producing these things, and they need to have, if a television show is hot right now, well, they've got to have the novel before the television show kind of fizzles from popularity, so everything's very rushed. And because it's rushed, these franchise novels can at times seem rather formulaic. And there's a lot of formula that goes into these two especially that really just annoyed me. And I'll talk about it in a second, but you don't run into it so much in a lot of the Star Wars EU, because that was one of the great special things about the Star Wars EU was that those books were being written long after Star Wars had come out in theaters. I mean, they were written before the prequels even thought about being released, and then they continue to be written through the prequel era and stuff. But you didn't have like publishers and editors, nitpicking and trying to, overmanage, the book or the content or whatever. You had authors who loved the content getting together at cons talking about, okay, well, in your Star Wars novel, okay, if you're going to say that, then I'll do this in mine. So they'll correlate. You just had authors who were fans loving the content, creating these wonderful books. So that's why I love the EU. But there is a lot of meddling and there is a lot of formula that has to go into a lot of these franchise books. And there's one technique in particular that a lot of these franchise books do. And if you read a lot of these franchise books like I do, because you like the properties and whatnot, that's great. But be mindful of this. If you're a writer especially, be mindful of this technique, because it's not fun for the reader. It's annoying as crap for the reader, if you're me anyway. And that's this. You've got your main characters and you set up the challenge or whatever, and you're in your main character's perspective and everything. Great. Then there'll be a jump. And they'll introduce this completely new character. who's just almost like an everyman, like a worker here or there or something like that, or somebody, just that isn't really a main player in the universe. And they really give you that character's background, and they really try and make you care about this character. And it turns out that this character is probably going to end up dying, but they're just sort of a minor player in this big incident that needs to happen to move the story along. So if you're in your main character's perspective, we have to go stop, Mr. Evil, so we can, go over here, and Mr. Evil's going to try and pull off this heist that we've got to go stop. Well, instead of just narrating us our heroes going over to start, to fight the battle, or even giving us Mr. Evil's perspective or whatever, no, they've got to find the janitor at the warehouse where Mr. Evil is going to pull off his heist. And they have to introduce us to this janitor and in his backstory, some of his co-workers and their chummy little, jokes they sell and everything. And then, oh no, there's a heist coming. And all the time as a reader, especially if you've read enough of these, what they're doing. All right, this guy's going to die because he's somebody that I don't care about and I've never met, and the writer really wants me to care about them. Oh no, the heist is coming. I knew the heist was coming because I was excited about following that part of the story when I was with my heroes or with the main story. But they have to do this to pad out the books, because they need, these freelance writers get paid for so many, words. They have to have the outline approved, the big, a certain length of a novel to approve, so it can be a little mass market paperback like this. So they use this technique to pad out the story, to, let's jump into so-and-so's perspective here and give their view of this incident that you already knew what was going to happen. You're already excited to see it happen. You don't want to just grind the pace to a halt in, Joe somebody's little perspective over here, while you see everything that is going to happen anyway happen, and it happens slowly, and they're so shocked that it's happening. It's so boring. It's so freaking boring. And this is a pitfall that Drew Karpyshyn falls into a lot. Now, I love Drew Karpyshyn's work. He's written some of the greatest Star Wars books. I love them. I loved Revelation. Mass Effect Revelation was really good. Or, excuse me. There it is. Revelation was really good. But he does do this technique a lot. And he does this technique in his own work, too. It's kind of the thing, if you write so many of these franchise books. I tried reading Drew Karpyshyn's own personal property that he wrote, his own, title that he wrote. And it was just the same thing. It was, I couldn't get into the story at all. A lot of reviews are like, but if you stick with it, by the end, it actually gets good. Every single chat was like almost halfway into the book of Drew Karpyshyn's own, personal property novel. He introduces you to a character. He tells you about their world, then they die. Then he introduces you to this other new character. He tells you about their world, and then they die. Then he introduces you to the other two character with their kids, and then they all die. And then it's just like, bro, enough. Give me somebody to care and give a crap about, But they do this, and they learn this technique from writing these, formulaic franchise novels. And you don't have to pad out stories like that. But again, just because the industry, they got to write, however many of these books that year to make a living, and they pull these little, cheats, and it's not fun for the reader. So I was if you are a Mass Effect fan like myself, especially if you're a completionist and you really want to just know all of the lore, the content that goes on in these books really is some good stuff that weaves into the overall story. In my opinion, though, you could just read the synopsis of these online and you get what you needed to know. But if you're a completionist like me and you just want to read them, great, read them. I definitely enjoyed Mass Effect Revelation. The comics are pretty good. I'll talk about them more later. But, I do say that there is a lot of tie-in. It's not kind of like, oh, here's a story that's sort of set in the universe, but it doesn't really touch the events. No, the things that go on in these books, when you do eventually meet Kali, as she fits into Anderson's life and so forth. So I like that. So I wanted to give that little review of these books, but also as a way to talk about that, the type of writing you encounter a lot of times in this franchise writing. And it's not always, I'm not saying that the authors themselves are bad authors. Oh, they're subpar authors. They're writing popular franchise. No, not at all. But if that's their livelihood, they're going to more often than not slip into some of these little cheats and some of these little ways that are just annoying to readers, and it's a shame. I wish they didn't have to do that. I wish they wouldn't do that. I don't know, get a side job so you don't have to write 1,000 novels a year, something. But anyway,